Welcome back to Business Week on Arise News. I'm joined now by two very special analysts. First is Associate Director, Global Risk Consulting Firm Control Risk, Oluwadamilare Adesola. She's going to be helping me review some of our top stories in detail. And of course, sitting next to her is none other than Global Business Report anchor of Arise News, Reuters, Oddiri. So we've got lots of stories to get through.
Great to see you both.
Great to see you both. So, Damilare, I want to start with you. We saw a contraction in Saudi's economic output, and it seems like the government is really in a bit of a bind here, trying to diversify away from its major cash cow, the oil sector. What really is the strategy here, and what's happening to the economy?
So the Saudi government, like you rightly mentioned, have introduced this ambitious goal to transition away from an oil-dependent economy by 2030. And that included a lot of different investments. So I don't know how much you know about them buying, the football team league that they bought. They also invested in some video games. They acquired some video game operations. They also introduced they're working on a smart city. So there are a few initiatives that they have introduced, but they sort of hit a roadblock, and that's primarily just been driven just by the fundamentals. The economy continues to be very heavy on oil, whether it comes to government inflow, when it comes to employment. So even 2 out of 3 Saudis are employed by the government, mostly in oil, and then also when it comes to their export revenue. And so with everything that's happening with OPEC and the different cuts that Saudi has been looking to push, that has then started to have an impact on their economy. But I believe that this is a temporary roadblock. I think what we would just be waiting to see is how much it persists. So usually what we would say is 2 consecutive quarters of contraction would then mean that they're officially in a recession.
Gosh, exactly. Saudi.
Exactly. So, but if you look back at other countries that try to do similar, so the UAE, for example, they had periods where, usually the growth path to, sort of becoming this economy that is driven by innovation, driven by, 21st century ideals, you'd see a little bit of a up and down in that growth path. And I think this is just what we are experiencing. So as long as they just continue with all the different initiatives that they've introduced, working with investment, foreign investors, having all these attractive initiatives. I mean, even Control Risk opened a branch in Riyadh recently. So they're having all these initiatives to push foreign investment in the country, and I think over time it would definitely happen.
It's really interesting. The world's largest oil exporter is potentially struggling. What hope is there for the other oil exporters? Well, we'll come to Africa now. Kenya, a court of appeal has declared the finance bill unconstitutional. This has been a long journey from when William Ruto's government was going to implement this, then the protests, which kind of continue, perhaps government ministers being sacked. Is this the end of the issue now with this court of appeal legislation or ruling on the finance bill?
We hope that it is, because I think the thing that the Kenya government is not seeing when it comes to the demands of the people is that they're actually asking for it to be removed totally. But they're saying, let's amend, let's remove. Okay, what don't you like about it? And they're like, no, nothing.
Just the whole thing.
Just the whole thing, chuck it in the bin. And I think that's where they're not seeing eye to eye, and this is sort of stalemate. So even with this court saying the finance bill is unconstitutional, it's just as is. What if we amend it? Can it become constitutional? And I think until the government comes to a place where it's like, you know what, let's just maybe renew the last one for last year and just work on that for this year. But there's a lot of pressure from international partners to sort of diversify their revenue, to increase their revenue so they're not as dependent on debt. So I think it's just this, whether it's they're going to bow to internal pressure or external pressure, but something has got to give. And now they're talking about austerity measures and measures to cut, budget, especially some of their internal spending on the presidency and allowances. So that would be really what would show, the people of Kenya that, yes, this government is actually serious. And
it's interesting because my reading is that the people have forced the government's hand and potentially the court's hand, even though the courts are meant to be independent. But it resonates so much if you're a Nigerian in our current context. And we'll be talking about the protests later. But the final thing I wanted to go before I moved to Reuters was really around the 50,000 naira monthly stipend to Niger Delta youth. Thinking about the Niger Delta, the oil-producing region, we've had these sorts of programs. There was the amnesty program years ago. What change or difference is this really going to make?
I don't think it would make a difference, but I think it would sort of keep things as they are. It'll keep a lid on the top of the sort of internal brewings that we are seeing. It'll be good in the short term because there's a lot of militancy action increased in the last 6 months, and that continues to be a concern for Nigeria's production output. Some of the ambitious plans laid out by the Tinubu government when they were inaugurated was hinged upon an uptake in production, and that has continued to stall primarily because of, yes, investment, but also because of the militancy action that is sort of deterring those investments.
Yeah.
So I think this will just help to keep the people in the host communities happy, but it's still a short-term solution to a long-term problem. And so it then begins to the government saying, okay, what can we do in the long term? How can we make these organizations, these operating companies that are in the regions to employ responsible ways of doing a business, thinking about the environmental sustainability factors. So that's the long-term conversation that needs to be pushed by the government. But for now, it's good. They get their stipend. Hopefully there's no corruption in the disbursement of that stipend.
That's always the big issue.
That's another conversation. Somebody will be taking something somewhere and not only giving it to his friends. But provided that is dispersed as it should be in a sort of transparent way, transparent and fair way, I think that it would have substantial effect in the short term.
Great stuff, great stuff. Lots of interventions, social interventions. But we're going to a big macro story now, which is the U.S. Reuters. Data coming out of the U.S. Unemployment not good. Did the Fed overdo it with interest rates? Now that we're seeing a threat of a recession on the horizon.
Jerome Powell is being criticized for focusing too much on inflation and not focusing on the labor market. So with that jump to 4.3% that we saw for July, and the massive miss of the jobs created. So 114,000 is what we got. It was expected to be 175,000. We did about, in fact, the 206,000 that was created in June was revised downwards to 179,000. So the labor market is cooling. It looks like a lot faster than expected. You have people like Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren coming and saying that he should come back from vacation and cut rates now. But
before September.
Right, but if you do that, you will spook the markets even further. So yeah, I mean, he is being criticized for taking things a little too slowly. Expectations now for a rate cut now 50 basis points in September is what the markets are pricing in. So I have to see
I'm putting 100% likelihood on a definite rate cut. But a rate cut in the US has implications for the rest of the world, because we've been talking about attracting capital flows into a part of the world, getting more dollars in, getting more liquidity in. Even with a rate cut in the US, is that going to be enough of an incentive to see a shift in capital flows back to emerging markets?
Well, so the thing is, yeah, to some extent, but there's got to be more, right? So it's that, as you've correctly pointed out, the rates, the carry trade, as it's called, that differential. You've got to be continuous. You have to have continuous hikes in the emerging markets.
To make it attractive.
To make it attractive with the cut. And then we don't even know if that cut will be sustained over in the US. So you look at South Africa, they're on one path. Nigeria is hiking, they're holding. It's different, but you've got to look at Japan, for instance. Okay, so they're a perfect example. They've hiked 25 basis points. The yen has gone from a 34-year low of 164 to about 149. So you are seeing them coming up as we're expecting the US to come down. So yeah, you would, but then you would have to see more happening in those particular
and I guess for the US, the outcome of the elections could be key, because we're hearing that Donald Trump could be a big spender. And if he's going to be a big spender, then we might see rates starting to creep up again in 2025. So
correct. The thing is, he's talking about slapping tariffs on goods coming in, also maybe a 60% tariff on China to make up for tax cuts that he wants to, because his tax cuts that he put in 2017 are expiring next year. He says if he wins, he's going to make them permanent. So how do you make up for that revenue? But then they're inflationary, because most likely the other allies and so on will respond in kind, and then you have a trade war, and then you've got prices going up. So the markets are also saying that, if he comes in and he puts those tariffs in place, then that means now the Fed now has to start hiking rates again. So
we'll be watching those elections, and I know you love the US elections. But back to another story now. So we want to sort of take a look at another story. So with millions of Nigerians protesting across the country and asking for a return to subsidy as part of this End Bad Governance movement, many are asking about past ambitions by NNPC to revive the country's refinery. Here's a 2019 clip in which the group managing director of NNPC, Mele Kyari, sets a 4-year deadline for the full functionality of Nigeria's 4 refineries. Take a look.
The legitimate expectation from Nigerians that why can we be an oil-producing country with 4 refineries and yet importing sometimes 100% of our petroleum product requirement? It's very sad. The GMD Emeritus has told you the steps that we have taken when the Port Harcourt refinery is going to be in place. But I assure you, GMD will follow it up to make sure that within the life of this administration, before Baba's tenure ends in 2023, we'll deliver only 4 refineries.
I mean, Rotus, you had the rousing applause there, lots of confidence. Why have we not been able to revamp our refineries?
We have the will just doesn't seem to be there. And there's also the discussion around, it's like a car that keeps breaking down and gets you stuck on the streets, whether you should just sell it off or if it can actually be revamped. The Port Harcourt refinery, there have been promises after promises after promises. We're still not there. And look, when you make these type of promises to the country, it should be supported by data, right? So I'm your mechanic. You say, come and fix my car. I'm looking at it. Okay, I promise you that by this time your car will be fully, working. If it breaks down again or I don't deliver on that, you're going to ask me, why is that? So these refineries, we've just been going around and around and around. And again, as you pointed out in your remarks where we went to the video, it ties right into the process as we're saying, because if we had these fully functioning refineries with the 445,000 barrel per day capacity, then where would prices be for fuel, and would we be having these processes?
And in fact, if we had 445,000 barrels and we had 650,000 barrels, we would be so oversupplied, exporting, generating FX, prices would come down low domestically.
Exactly. Yeah. So the NNPC they got a lot of questions to answer at this point.
Well, in terms of the refineries, the NNPC needs funds to fund its infrastructure projects. And one of the things that's been in the news lately is NNPC raising money by essentially mortgaging or securitizing, if you like, Nigeria's future oil production.
Right.
Reuters recently reported that the NNPC was looking at another oil-backed loan of about $2 billion.
Right.
What is the sustainability of this type of borrowing?
Right. So the sustainability comes into question because how are they paying for it? According to the report that we're seeing, they're going to be leveraging more production to get these particular loans. And we already had this discussion with the Afri-Exim loan and so on and so forth. So the more you seek these loans and the more you mortgage future oil production, the less you have to give to a Dangote refinery or other indigenous oil refineries in the country. Because that's the issue. That's why in fact, in 2019, he also said that by middle of 2023, we would no longer be importing refined fuel anymore because the Dangote refinery is going to come on stream. But then you're not able to give them the crude that they need. And so with each of these, because this new loan here, I think they have to come out. I see, this is another thing about transparency.
We need more detail.
Yeah, they got to come out and tell us what are the details. Because I'm hearing the interest rates are kind of high. And so, again, it just puts more encumbrance on future oil production. And then again, don't forget, we have a joint venture agreement with International Oil. So of the 1.4, 1.5
half of that or
less than half is our own. And then you're now cutting that again to now go get loans. So we just need to have more transparency, and just let them come and tell us what's going on.
Absolutely. So, Oluwadamilare, I want to, if you have any comments on that, but I also want to ask about the demands of the protesters. Of course, the energy sector is always in focus because they're asking for a reduction in power sector tariffs, reduction in fuel prices, return of subsidy. Could the government actually realistically bow to any of these demands and change the course of some of these recent reforms?
I think some factors that are fueling the demands. I don't know if you've seen some of this some controversies that have been on social media about how there was actually never a subsidy and the government, it was just a sort of cartel of people just collecting government funds. I think that is primarily, or one of the factors that is fueling the demands for return, because it felt like it was something that was just fashioned and it was actually non-existent. And so it's like, okay, so let's take us back to that price. It seems as if that's the actual price.
But 100 naira per litre.
Exactly. So that's then you now actually look, what is the price of oil in the market? We've talked about the refinery. We don't have anything locally that we're producing. Now NNPC has agreed to sell in naira to Dangote, and that could potentially, offset some of the pressures. But we're importing. What is the price of oil on the market, and how does that translate with all of the forex issues that we're facing? What is the realistic price? If you're saying okay, it's some 70 cents or whatever it is, how does that then translate to it being in naira? So if you're then saying even at 600 and something, that is actually being subsidized because that's not the actual price on the market. And so to then say you want to go back to 100, I think it's then a factor of then it's not just a reintroduction of subsidies, but it's a sort of return to that was priced in what 2013.
Yeah. But could it also just be a tactic to force a conversation, right? You
Right.
go to the extreme so that you force the stakeholders to sit at the table and get some dialogue around the pain points
Like
economically.
minimum wage. They wanted
Yeah,
600,000,
exactly. And now we're at
they ended up
70,000 naira. But I mean, in dollar terms, it's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Look, if you go to petrolprices.com or whatever, the average price of fuel is $1.32. $1.32, we closed at 1,006. Puts you at 2,112 naira per liter, right? So that's just looking at where things are now.
So you're saying,
I mean, before you look at landing costs and all that stuff. So yeah, as you said, bring them back to the table and talk. But I think the ship or the horse has left the stable or the ship has left the docks on the fuel thing. That's not coming back down.
Yeah.
Because. Your fiscal structure can't take that. You're asking for I mean, where were we before we moved? It was 185 per liter, and you want to go down to
100.
Diesel, which is deregulated, is over 1,000. So I mean, yeah.
But it doesn't remove the fact that Nigerians are suffering.
Of course. Of course.
I mean, I think that's the principle behind those demands.
Yeah.
I think even some of the leaders of that movement, we don't know who they are necessarily,
Right.
recognize that some of these things probably will never happen. But it may ultimately be dialogue. Well, speaking of the fiscal squeeze, because a lot of this is because Nigeria has a cash crunch.
Right.
It has a revenue squeeze. And now people are saying the government may be clutching at straws, finding ways to pull money out of different sectors. The banking sector tax, the windfall tax has been an eye of the storm. And recently, FBN Holdings chairman Adesola came out to make a statement that took the market by surprise. Rotus, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, Femi Otedola, the strong man of the capital market. So yeah, we're putting his quotes up there where he's talking to the press saying that he expresses his strong support for the windfall tax. Now, it ties, as you said, it ties right into these protests because as much as the protests are looking at the extravagances of government, Femi Otedola is also looking at the extravagances of the private sector. So he points out in his comments that, private jets, for instance, banks in Nigeria, some of them own them. And he said about, it costs about, what, 500 million or so has been spent. And then, his point is that when you look at other climes, banks in other countries don't own private jets, right? And so he's saying that he supports the windfall tax and it should be used towards infrastructure and so on and welfare, again, which ties into the protest. But there's been some pushback and, on the extravagances side, he makes an excellent point. There's really no argument there. But because I think Mustafa Chike-Obi, the head of the Bank Directors Association of Nigeria, he put out a tweet saying that they're going to have a meeting, I think, on the 12th, and that this is, they actually
that
don't support it.
That Otedola is on his own.
He's on his own, right? So there's, because the thing is with the tax, banks take risks, right? And if you're a shareholder that is investing in a bank and they make a profit off a devaluation or whatever, you would expect that they would, share that with you in dividends or put it back into retained earnings. And on the flip side, and don't forget, the CBN did tell the banks last year
not to pay dividends from those.
Thank you. And now you're coming around and taxing them, And then if you're going to tax banks because they made extraordinary profits from a devaluation, do you give a tax credit to manufacturers and other companies that lost a lot of money from the same devaluation? So there's a lot, but again, as Otedola does, and he's an activist investor, he's always putting the cat amongst the pigeons. He has started this conversation again, so it's good to have this conversation.
Yeah,
right
indeed.
now.
And Damilola, I want to hear from you. How are investors? Because part of what you do at Control Risk is you advise people of market risk, political risk, investment risk. How are they reading these events? Maybe both the protests, the policy yo-yos, if you like. What are investors saying?
I think it just reinforces that perception of unpredictability in the market, where you can start your financial year, and you have these, robust plans for Nigeria. You say you want to make MTN or whoever you are, you want to make this much, and then the government comes to introduce a tax or introduce a policy or something that then counters your plans. And so it makes it difficult to just sort of build any plans or mitigation strategies in that light. But I think that coupled with that, the conversation of Forex and the availability of Forex and reputation, if we're looking at a foreign investor, they're mainly concerned, even if those that have the long-term game, they're mainly concerned with at what point would I be able to pull out my money? At what point would I be able to repatriate those funds? And then you have the government even introducing, the exported levy that was introduced and then pulled back. And then it's then a case of, is the government really reading the room? Do they really understand what's going on? Those stakeholder conversations, those collaborative conversations that should be happening at the behind the scenes of policy formulation, they don't seem to be happening. And so I think it's really uncertain. It just appears to be an uncertain environment. You don't know when they're going to be slapped with the fine. You don't know whether you're Meta or whoever it is. And so that's just what's just driving the sentiment.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Rotus, because since the start of the year, or maybe since the start of the administration, we've seen various levies introduced and then pulled back. On the one hand, it would suggest that there is troubleshooting, right? The government is looking for solutions. So the government is not just resting on its laurels. So, you have to give some brownie points for the fact that they're literally trying in what is a very tight corner to find ways to fund the budget, to find ways to fund Nigeria's infrastructure needs. Even though some of those policies are bowing under pressure and not sitting well with some, but some of them seem to be sailing through. So ultimately, what is the end goal here?
Well, the end goal is that you want to be able to get the fiscal structure on a strong path. But the issue is that, as Damilare mentioned, with austerity measures being mentioned in Kenya, that's kind of what has to happen. You've got this short-term period of pain. And people need to remember that government is a continuum. This administration, even though they are the same political party or whatever, there were decisions made in the last administration that have impacted this administration. And so the last administration keeping fuel prices at an unrealistic level, keeping the exchange rate at an unrealistic level, it forced the last administration to come in. If Damilare breaks this chair and I have to sit after she leaves the studio and I'm coming for an interview, I have to right the ship in terms of how I navigate sitting in this chair for the interview during the period of time. So not that you're violent, I'm going to take a chair. So that has to be recognized. So, I think the issue here is that the public needs to have patience, but it's tough to ask them to be patient, right?
Sure.
When you do have twin blows of removing fuel subsidies and freeing up the exchange rate, it's a tough situation in the mid to short term.
Yeah, so I guess final thoughts from you. Looking at everything that's happening now with the protests and the economic pinch, I saw an image of a woman who was waiving her electricity tariffs. We haven't even talked about that, which is another huge one. What is the most optimal outcome here in terms of what the government may concede on? Are we going to see more cash transfer programs? Are we going to see more interventions? A policy reversal in some of these areas is probably unlikely. So what is the best case scenario? I'll start with you, Damilare, and end with Rotus.
I would say it's two things. First of all, like you've mentioned, so we have a social safety net, the program that's under the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, but that should be ideally expanded. Right now, it targets really just the rural population, and it doesn't really take into consideration the urban poor. And so you're having some of these initiatives extended to the urban poor, extended to those in the vulnerable societies in the urban communities, I think that would go a long way. The second thing, what Rotus mentioned about the pinch, everybody's feeling the pinch, but the government doesn't seem to be feeling the pinch in their pocket. I think that it will go a long way if there's some sort of initiative that is introduced, whether it's a removal or suspension of allowances or sort of austerity measures that is introduced, not in the way that whether it's a road infrastructure or something, but
so you want the government to model the austerity behavior.
Let's see that you are suffering. I think that would go a long way to making people feel like, okay, you share our sentiment, you're actually feeling our pain, you actually want our benefit. But on the plus side, there's the economic emergency plan that is supposed to come out anytime soon.
That's a stabilization plan that was announced recently.
Yes, so I do have some hope for that plan. But like you said, we've just been trying different things, and I think it's time to just bring all the experts. We've brought the experts in the room now. Let's see what the experts have said about the way forward, because it's not really just A, B, C, D. It's not as simple as it is. It's so complicated now, the different factors that are at play, and it's just important for the government to have show some compassion. I do not appreciate the statement of be patient. It's been how long? And in fact, I'm one of those people when a customer service person tells me, please exercise some patience. It just aggravates me. Don't tell me to be patient for what is my right. Let me show me what you're doing. Show me how you're working. Show me how you are on my side and what you are planning to do, and that you are hearing me. And I think that would just go a long way to just sort of putting a lid on.
Communication is key.
It's optics. James, and you got to watch your language. The Senate President Godswill Akpabio going on stage and telling people that go and protest, women are eating. That is, you can't have that. So I have nothing else to add. It's about optics. You got to cut spending, and let the public know that, okay, we're with you on this. And that's how to get through this. If I see you doing that, then yeah, I'm less likely to protest.
Certainly, tough choices for Nigeria in this season. Very tough choices. Of course, the protests are meant to go on for a few more days, but we'll be watching events closely. Thank you so much, Rotis Oddiri, for coming on. And of course, Rotis is also on during the week on Global Business Report, continuing the stories. And of course, Oluwadamilare Adesola of Control Risk Associate Director, for sharing your views today. Thank you so much, both of you. Well, that's all we have time for in Business Week. I'm Rolake Akinkugbe. Let's continue the conversation on X and do have a lovely rest of the weekend. See you soon.